The stories you are about to hear will be heard for the first time on this channel. They may harm you psychologically. I would appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. Good vibes.
Casper and Lily huddled behind the counter, the reality of their escape sinking in. The small diner felt like a sanctuary amidst the terror they had just fled from. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, hovered protectively near them, her worry etched clearly on her face. She had handed Casper a glass of water, which he sipped gratefully, trying to calm his frayed nerves. Lily clung to his side, her hands still shaking from the ordeal. Outside, the man remained a menacing figure in the shadows, his presence a constant reminder that their nightmare was far from over. The minutes seemed to stretch on endlessly as they waited for the police to arrive. Casper's mind raced with the events of the evening, the bizarre encounter with the stranger, and the surreal experience of being hunted in his own home. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the man's cryptic words and his sudden appearance. "Who is he?" Casper muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. Lily, still trembling, looked up at him with wide eyes. "I don't know, Casper, but he seemed to know you. It's like he's been watching us for a long time." Casper shuddered at the thought. The idea that this man had been observing them, learning about their lives, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike was deeply unsettling. He glanced out the window again, but the man had disappeared. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over him. Where had he gone? Was he still lurking somewhere nearby, plotting his next move? Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached. Relief surged through Casper as he saw the flashing lights of a police car pulling up in front of the diner. Two officers entered, their expressions serious as they approached the counter. The waitress quickly explained the situation, and Casper and Lily recounted their harrowing experience, their voices trembling with emotion. The officers listened intently, their faces growing grimmer with each detail. "We'll check out your house," one of them said, his tone reassuring. "In the meantime, you two need to stay here where it's safe." Casper nodded, feeling a bit of the tension ease. The presence of the police made him feel more secure, but he couldn't shake the lingering fear. The officers left, and the waitress offered them a booth where they could sit and collect themselves. She brought them coffee and some sandwiches, urging them to eat and try to relax. Casper took a sip of the coffee, its warmth providing a small measure of comfort. He glanced at Lily, who was staring blankly at the table. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're safe now," he said softly, trying to reassure both her and himself. She nodded, but her eyes remained distant, haunted by the memories of the evening. As they sat there, the diner's patrons began to return to their conversations, the normalcy of their surroundings a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed Casper and Lily's lives. The waitress hovered nearby, casting concerned glances their way. Casper appreciated her kindness, but he couldn't help feeling like they were still in danger. His mind kept drifting back to the man's words, the way he had seemed to know so much about them. There was something profoundly unsettling about the whole situation. An hour passed before the police returned. Their expressions were a mix of concern and frustration. "We checked your house," one of the officers said, sitting down across from Casper and Lily. "There's no sign of the man you described. It's like he vanished into thin air." Casper's heart sank. The man was still out there somewhere, and they had no idea where he might strike next. "We'll have a patrol keep an eye on your house tonight," the officer continued, "and we'll increase the neighborhood watch for the next few days. In the meantime, It might be best if you stayed somewhere else. Casper nodded, the reality of their situation sinking in. They couldn't go back to the house, not with the threat of the man still looming over them. He looked at Lily, who seemed even more shaken by the news. "We can stay at my parents' place," he suggested, trying to offer a solution. "They're out of town, but we have a spare key. It'll be safer than going back home." Lily agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, let's go there. I don't want to go back to our house right now." The officers offered to drive them, and Casper gratefully accepted. They gathered their belongings and followed the officers out to the car. As they drove through the quiet streets of Darlington, Casper couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every corner a potential ambush. When they finally arrived at his parents' house, he felt a momentary sense of relief. The familiar surroundings provided a semblance of safety, a small haven in the midst of their ordeal. The officers walked them to the door, ensuring that they got inside safely. "We'll be patrolling the area," one of them assured Casper. "If you see or hear anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call us." Casper thanked them, and they watched as the police car drove away, its lights disappearing into the night. He closed the door and turned to Lily, who was looking around the house with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "We should try to get some sleep," he suggested, though he knew it was unlikely they would find any rest. They settled into the guest room, the weight of the night's events pressing heavily on them. Casper lay awake, his mind racing with thoughts of the man and the twisted game he had forced them into. The house was eerily quiet, every creak and groan amplified in the stillness. He reached out and took Lily's hand, holding it tightly. "We'll get through this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "We'll figure out who he is and why he's doing this, and we'll stop him." As the hours passed, Casper's exhaustion finally overcame his fear, and he drifted into a fitful sleep. His dreams were plagued by images of the man, his piercing blue eyes and sinister smile haunting his every thought. He woke several times, heart pounding, but each time he found Lily beside him, her presence a small comfort in the darkness. Morning eventually came, the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains. Casper sat up, rubbing his eyes and trying to shake off the remnants of his nightmares. They spent the day at his parents' house, too afraid to venture outside. Casper called his parents to explain the situation, and they offered their support and urged him to stay as long as they needed. Despite the reassurances, Casper couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. The man was still out there, watching, waiting. As the day turned into evening, the anxiety only grew. They decided to stay another night at his parents' house, hoping that the police would find some lead that would bring them closer to capturing the man. That evening, as they sat in the living room, the phone rang. Casper answered it, expecting to hear from the police with an update, but the voice on the other end froze his blood. "Hello, Casper," the man said, his tone calm and mocking. "Enjoying your little hideaway? I told you, you can't escape me." Casper's hand trembled as he gripped the phone. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and anger. The man laughed, a chilling sound. "I want to finish our game, Casper, and this time there won't be any interruptions." The line went dead, and Casper stared at the phone in horror. He turned to Lily, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Casper took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "He knows where we are," he said quietly. "He's coming for us. Lily's face went pale, and she clutched his arm. "What are we going to do, Casper?" He looked around the house, searching for any means of defense. "We need to call the police," he said, reaching for his cell phone. He dialed the number with shaking hands, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. "Stay inside and lock the doors," she instructed. "We'll send officers to your location immediately." Casper thanked her and hung up, feeling a small measure of relief. They weren't alone in this. Help was on the way. But as he turned to reassure Lily, a sudden crash from the back of the house made his heart leap into his throat. The man was already here. They bolted toward the front door, but as they reached it, the man appeared, blocking their escape. His eyes gleamed with a cold, malevolent joy. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" he taunted. Casper's mind raced as he looked for another way out. He grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at the man, who dodged it with a sinister laugh. "Oh, Casper, you're going to have to do better than that." Casper and Lily backed away, retreating into the living room. The man followed, his presence filling the space with an oppressive sense of dread. As they reached the far side of the room, the front door burst open and 2 police officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. The man turned, his expression twisting into one of fury. "This isn't over, Casper," he snarled before bolting toward the back of the house. The officers gave chase, but Casper and Lily stayed put, their bodies trembling with a mix of fear and relief. Moments later, they heard a struggle and then silence. The officers returned, their faces grim. "We've got him in custody," one of them said, though his tone was not entirely reassuring. "But we need to take you both to the station for a statement." Casper nodded, too exhausted to argue. They were escorted to the police car, and as they drove away from his parents' house, Casper looked back one last time. He couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the man's capture, their ordeal was far from over. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. At the police station, they recounted their story once more, detailing every horrifying moment. The officers listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" one of them asked. Casper shook his head. "No, he just showed up at my house last night. He seemed to know everything about us, but I've never seen him before." The officer frowned. "We'll run his fingerprints and see if we can find out more. In the meantime, you both need to stay somewhere safe." As they left the station, the weight of the past 24 hours pressed heavily on them. Casper looked at Lily, her face pale and tired. "We'll get through this," he said, trying to muster some confidence. "We have to." She nodded, leaning into him for support. They were far from home, their lives upended by a stranger's twisted game. But they had each other, and as long as they were together, they could face whatever came next. As they walked into the dawn of a new day, the future seemed uncertain, but they were determined to reclaim their lives from the shadow of fear that had taken hold.